Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay, great, fantastic. Rhys Cohen
Excellent.
from Australia. It's already Sunday morning or something for you. How far apart are we in time again?
It's 6:42 in the morning, and I am ready to talk about cannabis.
Fantastic. Okay, Rhys. Let me tell you something. You were a young
Mm.
boy at some point. You never heard of cannabis, and eventually you found out about it. Tell us about how that happened.
Oh, gee, I guess my indoctrination into cannabis was pretty similar through high school, as most young Australians would have come across it. It's pretty common over here. I imagine it'd be similar to how things happen in Canada. But beyond sort of social experience, my sort of real curiosity about cannabis came when I was a young undergrad student, and I was really keen to find out about sort of how the social coordination happens between illicit cultivation and illicit consumption, and how price movements affect that. I'm obviously a huge nerd, as you can tell. And I ended up doing my honors thesis on the legalization of cannabis in America in 2015. That's sort of when I really got to grips with the issue.
And where did you
And
hand that thesis in? Which school was it?
Oh, right, that was the Department of Political Economy at the University of Sydney.
Okay.
Um, yeah, which is my alma mater.
And what was the reaction to that paper from your teachers and your instructors?
Yeah, well, I mean, I happen to be lucky to be studying in an incredibly left-wing and open-minded department, which was handy. But even so, people were a bit skeptical. I got a few chuckles, got a few laughs. But I'm not quite at the stage where I can say who's laughing now. But maybe next year. Um,
So you had to weather the storm of a little bit of criticism, as many as almost 3 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. A little bit of criticism. I mean, I've been quite lucky in that I've had the support of my family through my involvement with medical cannabis in Australia, and I think it's starting to be taken a lot more seriously now. When it first started, I mean, a good sort of litmus test is how taxi drivers react to your job and sort of what you do. I find that's like generally a good barometer of like how society's going with a certain
What
issue.
do they say? What
Uh,
does the taxi driver say to you?
well, back a couple of years ago, it was, oh, really? So like you're a dealer, and nowadays it's more like, oh yeah, I heard about that. That's the kids who have the epilepsy, right? So we're getting there piece by piece.
Once the cab drivers figure it out, that's everybody knows it.
That's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so tell us about Can 10, the
Uh,
medicinal can this, and you're going to have to go slowly because a lot of people in America and Canada, not that we're
uh,
stupid, but we just don't have these kinds of things, not to my knowledge anyway. This
uh,
sounds like a very hands-on, progressive situation. So Can 10
uh,
is two N's, Can 10 Medicinal Cannabis Leadership Program. What
that's
is
right.
that? Who set it up, and what do you do, and what are its goals?
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, so the Can10, so Can10 is a company. It's originally from Israel. Can10 Australia is a subsidiary of that. And it's a medicinal cannabis company focused on education and training. So the Medicinal Cannabis Leadership Program was the first ever full-scale cannabis education program in Australia that we put on last September down in Melbourne. And it was a 4-day seminar series, essentially. So we had 16 different speakers across talking across everything from plant botany and cultivation through to chemistry, medical science, regulation and law, and sort of everything in between. Um,
Let me
so
ask you
it
this:
was,
the science that you've been able to overturn in this effort
yeah,
has any of this, and I'm thinking, it's positive science, obviously.
sure.
Has any of that contributed? Do you know in any kind of way to government parsing over? Has the government checked that stuff out
Uh-huh.
before they've laid out their new rules and regs?
um, I don't think they did, but they are doing so now.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so the Australian government is set itself up, basically set up this medical cannabis system in Australia. And the premise was that, we would treat cannabis like any other medicine and we would just listen to the science. And if the science said that this is an appropriate medicine, then, it would be made available to those people. They quickly realized that actually, we don't know a whole lot about cannabis still, as far as medical use goes, at least not in the ways in which, we understand other drugs, medicines. And so they have embarked upon a real great a program of scientific inquiry. So there's real large-scale clinical trials happening in Australia at the moment, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of medical scientific research going on. Unfortunately, a lot of that is attempting to find out things that are already known in the community. Like, hey, guess what? Cannabis helps manage chronic pain. That's no news to to any of your listeners, I'm assuming.
Sure.
But we've never really asked that question in a way that would satisfy sort of medical practitioners in Australia.
But it is considered a medicine. And so
absolutely,
do you tax it?
We tax it in the same way that we would tax any other medicine. So there aren't any special cannabis-specific taxes or anything like that.
Well, what do you think about this in Canada? Here we have a tax in Ontario, this large province. They've and I'm sure this will spread like wildfire with these pigs at the trough. But the taxing at $1 a gram, they're going to sell it at about $1, $10 or $12 or $13 a gram or whatever it is, and then they're going to tax one of those dollars is tax. So that's $454 a pound tax. Do you think you have anything like that going on, or have you managed to clear that hurdle?
Well, unfortunately, Alan, if that was all we had to pay, we would be very, very lucky.
Oh, what else what else are you paying?
Well, I mean, so the kinds of cannabis medicines that we have available at the moment, I mean, patient access in Australia is very restricted still. But the products that we have available might cost someone $10,000 to $30,000 a year to maintain a prescription for.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat yourself? I think you just said it's going to cost a patient $30,000 a year to access.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How is that?
Well, these are highly manufactured and imported pharmaceutical grade cannabis products. We're talking like Sativex level pharmaceutical formats, essentially.
And is there going to be some kind of funding structure or public medicine to take the burden off someone spending $2,000 or $3,000 a month to get through?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, Australia is actually, we've got a really, really good health system usually. And normally medicines don't cost people an arm and a leg in Australia. The problem with cannabis is that it's technically, these are unregistered, in inverted commas, unregistered medicines. Like, they're things that we haven't spent 10 years doing clinical trials on. The government hasn't said, yes, this definitely works for X, Y, or Z. They're kind of experimental. That's how we're treating them.
So we're all babes in the woods with a flashlight at this point.
Exactly. Okay. We have no idea what's going on, is what the government's saying. So normally for a registered medicine, for like, Panadol or, some, antibiotics, you can have them on what's called a pharmaceutical benefit scheme, which is when the government directly subsidizes the costs of particular medicines. But you can't do that with cannabis medicines yet because they hadn't been registered, and that's about maybe 5 to 10 years away from happening. So in the meantime, yeah, you're stuck with 30 grand a year sometimes. There are some states in Australia that have decided to subsidize these medicines on their own, so not relying on the federal government's system, but sort of putting their hand in their own back pocket. But of course, the only states that are prepared to do that are the ones with the most draconian patient access laws, because the last thing they want to do is ending up spending 30 grand per patient times 20,000 patients. It'll be just a huge cost for them. So yeah, it's a real catch-22.
It is. I think we should establish a floating island nation called Draconia and just send all of these idiots over there to regulate themselves to death.
I think you just described Australia, actually. So
oh, come on. No, hey, about Australia, I wanted to get into this. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, and it's okay if you don't. But Australia has a lot of different, let's call them natural hazards compared to Canada, different ones.
Oh, yeah.
Out in the outback, I'm sure you've got all kinds of spiders and weird bugs and reptiles nobody's even heard of or seen. And cannabis is very, one of the criticisms of it is, it doesn't work for everything, but it does work well for so many things. Have you had any knowledge or experience on something like some kind of a nasty snake bite venom application, or does it have any kind of indication on that front from some of your more funky animals over there?
Whoa, yeah, that's a really interesting question. Let me think. So you're right. Australia is full of horrible things that want to kill you in painful ways. That's kind of our thing.
Well, that's how you got started too. I mean, come on.
That's right. Uh, Luckily, I don't think anyone's died of snake venom in Australia since the 80s, because if you live in a country full of poisonous things that want to kill you, the first thing you do is invest in lots of anti-venom research. However,
right.
One of the leading causes, our national cancer in Australia is melanoma cancer, because we have really strong sun. We've got a thin ozone layer down here. Australians suffer at extraordinary rates from
You look like you might be
cancers.
one of those main sufferers. No offense.
Yeah, right. Like I clearly should not be in Australia.
Yeah, you look like a fair-haired Irish guy who never sees sun at all, actually.
That's right. So melanoma is a big issue over here, and one of the research projects that's currently underway at the University of Canberra is researching, how we might be able to use cannabis to treat melanoma cancers. So I guess in that way, cannabis is being explored as part of a treatment for, some unique Australian conditions, maybe not the plants and animals, but definitely the natural environment.
Yeah, it's fascinating to go down some of these roads with a clear conscience and trying to apply it, because if it's so good for so many different things. Unlike a lot of medications, it's like one medication is specifically for heart disease, and another one is for whatever. But that would be pretty cool to find out that we've got another inroad there. So tell us about this program. Who gets into this program where they are able to learn historical, cultural, legal, regulatory, commercial, all of the aspects in the chemical and agricultural, agricultural and chemical aspects. Is this a school, or do people apply for this?
Yeah, well, it's a private enterprise, so anyone's encouraged to get in touch and to enroll and to participate. I mean, it's not an incredibly cheap experience, but it is a valuable one, and the people that we've had come through so far have found a lot of value in it. We ran it in partnership with Deakin Co., which is like one of the arms of corporate training arm of Deakin University, which is a university down in Melbourne. So it's designed in the same way as an undergrad sort of seminar series might run. But it's not an accredited university course yet. That's something that's being worked on at the moment.
Okay. And how long does it take to complete the course?
So the one we ran in September was
That's 4 days. Okay.
Yeah. 4 full days, and then a couple of additional events sort of in and around it.
And then you've got graduates. How many people graduated this time? Did everyone pass?
Oh yeah, well it's we don't have tests or assessments, but we had 30 people come through and graduate, and 30 happy campers. So it was quite an experience. We had 30 participants and we had 16 facilitators over 4 days. So
that's incredible. That's a great ratio.
Yeah, that's the right ratio to have, I think. I mean, I've had some experience teaching undergrads myself, and I tell you what. If you have class sizes that are getting up to where they are now, it becomes impossible to have a real sort of conversation. So keeping it nice and intimate is what we're aiming for.
And that's a great idea. So I'd like to come down there and do it, but it's going to be too far, too time consuming right away. So this was your first wave in September. That's right?
That's right. Yeah.
And how often are you going to try to do this throughout the course of the year? Is it a once-a-year thing or every few months?
We'll ramp it up. So we're looking to run another one around March, this time in Sydney. But it's early days. I mean, we're trying to grow sort of as the industry's growing at the same time. It's all very new over here still. We only had medical cannabis legalized in February 2016. So it really hasn't been that far down the track yet.
Right. Tell me about these practical tools that they learn. All of these students, these 16 folks, and they are that's going to help them build different things like commercial projects, you say, scientific projects. So give me an example of one of those. Like, what's a commercial project, for example, from the ground up? Like, this is something dreamed up out of nowhere, or how would someone take this knowledge and bring it to the field of this usage?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. Well, I mean, starting, an LP in Australia is no small task. It's probably a lot harder and more financially costly than in Canada at the moment. And one of the things that, I mean, so I do commercial consulting as well as my involvement with Can10. So I speak with a lot of people who are looking to start plant touching businesses in some way, shape, or form. And the real challenges they have, I mean, besides access to capital, is just speaking to the right people at the right time and networking. So knowing who to call on if you need a lawyer, knowing who to call on if you need to source plant genetics, knowing
sorry,
who
if
to
you
put in
need
your
to what?
license
Sorry,
application.
if you need
Source
to
plant genetics. Sorry,
Oh,
my
I see.
accent's pretty heavy,
No,
especially
it
this
was
time
just
of
the
the morning.
speed of it. Yeah, it was just the speed
Oh,
of it.
okay.
Sourcing
Yeah,
plant genetics. Okay, great. Yeah,
yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense. Sure.
Yeah, and just putting people in, like making sure that you have a network of people that you can draw on for expertise. So we had a few people come through the program who are at the early stages of building their own plant touching companies. Plenty of people from the horticulture and hydroponic equipment sort of side of things. Some chemists, a GP, a few pharmacists, a nurse. So it was quite a diverse group of people. And as you know, I mean, people get involved with cannabis for a whole number of different reasons.
Sure.
Yeah, the idea was to have something that could provide a good base level of knowledge to everyone.
Yeah.
For them to go forward and do what they want with that knowledge, whatever that might mean to them.
Well, it's always been a goal of mine to get to your country, and I'd love to get down there sometime. But since I don't know much about it, how do you feel about here in Canada, and I guess in the States and all over from where I've read, there are a lot of doctors and MDs and nurses, as you say, on board with this. They're actively trying to get it going and trying it in different applications. And then there are other doctors who just absolutely refuse. No, that's all nonsense. None of that works. It's all bullshit. Like my first guy that basically showed me the door to this planet on the way out, and I decided he was wrong. There's a lot of doctors, and they're coming out of the same schools. I mean, you have to learn how to be a doctor. Can you understand why it is that some of them are so on board with this, and others tell you it's nothing more than wives' tale?
Yeah, it's funny. I think most doctors would start out with not much knowledge of cannabis because, like you say, it's not something that's really taught in the course of them being trained as a doctor. Most good doctors are open-minded about most things and are humble to some extent and are prepared to learn from their patients as well as from other areas. And I think, in my experience, the difference between a doctor that's interested in exploring cannabis and a doctor that isn't is whether or not they've had a patient who's come to them and shown them, in the flesh that cannabis can work, So
right.
I've spoken to doctors who say, hey, I didn't really think much about cannabis, but then one of my patients came in and, normally their pain is at, a 7 out of 10 most days and they find it difficult to walk. But today, they walked in and they were happy and smiling and they said, yeah, hey, guess what? Like, I got some black market cannabis oil. And it's changed my life, and they get to see that in reality. I think that's been a real key difference.
That's the hands-on thing, right? That's the hands-on thing because you know what? I've got hands-on and I got out of this by using it. And I used to get really upset and angry at people because of another medication I was on and because I was so frustrated that people wouldn't believe me while I was telling the truth. So in the early days, If you countered me, I might have been a little more salty than I ought to have been. But then I realized later on, this is so amazing what's happened to me as I've turned the corner and gotten out of trouble of death-wise and been able to maintain and recapture a life on this planet. I couldn't believe it. So I mean, I don't blame people anymore. I broaden my perspectives as well. Keeping on using this stuff, broaden my perspective. You can't expect people to understand this so fully until, such as yourself, you got your hands ready to some educational, creative aspect, or someone like myself. Like, I really don't expect people to understand it until they've actually, you don't know what it's like to ride a horse until you have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can read about it till you, as long as you want, but. It's so great that you're doing this. Are you aware of, I guess you're aware of Dr. Raphael Mechoulam of Israel?
Yes. Yeah. I've had just a couple of email conversations with him. But
do share some of those. Can you tell me? We're trying to get a hold of this guy. I mean, he's been doing this stuff since I was in diapers. And I'm sure he has much to do with any kind of advancement from this. I always think of him coming from Israel, and you say you're connected in that way. So tell us about some of your experiences with him, or what he thinks, or where you guys are. What are you talking about? Let's see your emails.
Well, it wasn't an in-depth conversation with him, but I've been in occasional contact. Our colleagues back in Israel work closely with Professor Mechoulam. In developing some of the educational materials, and he's a bit of an elder statesman over there. So he's the sort of person who will open up big conferences and be a keynote speaker at various events. But I think he's in the process, as all good academics should be, of handing on the baton, so to speak.
Okay, so he was the guy that identified THC as a component back in '62 or '3 or something, and so
that's right.
What's his position, personally speaking, or from whatever you can glean on this as a powerful, medicine, like a cancer fighter or another autoimmune disease, and a lot of things that trouble folks?
Yeah, well, I think Mechoulam's, as you say, his greatest contributions have been the most foundational. Scientific discoveries about, the endocannabinoid system and 2-AG and anandamide and THC, and that was incredibly groundbreaking stuff that really set the scene for the kind of research that's going on at the moment in Israel and around the world. So one of his proteges is an academic called Dedi Meiri, who's at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, I believe. Or I could be wrong, could be at the Technion. But he's another Israeli researcher who is sort of, I guess, taking on in the process of taking on Mechoulam's role as the global Israeli scientist. And we were lucky enough to have Dedi deliver a talk as part of the Can 10 program. He did it remotely from Israel. Where he sort of explained his current research, which is focused at the moment on cancer and anti-cancer effects of cannabinoids.
And what's his name again, this doctor?
Yeah, David, Meire.
N-E-I-R-E. Okay.
M for Mary, yeah.
Because the reason I ask is, as enamored as I am with Dr. Mechoulam, as so happy as I am that he is there and has been doing this work, let's get serious. He's almost 100 years old.
He's done a lot of stuff. Yep, he is definitely getting up there.
And so we need to make sure he effectively passes the baton of whatever it is. This is a valuable human being, and I would hate to see him, his works to sort of fall by the wayside simply because it wasn't here anymore. And you never hear about him in Canada. They never look him up in the States or England or Ireland when they're looking at the science of it. They'll just say, well, these police officers believe something, and they told the politicians who also believe something, and they never go to the hard data from people such as this. And that's incredible with the political support Canada gives Israel as well. So I'm just trying to get past that conundrum.
Yeah. Well, I think Professor Mechoulam is on the scientific advisory board of a Canadian LP. So if you wanted to track him down, you might do well to do it through that avenue. But what's really exciting about what's happened in Australia, at least since February 2016 is, between the philanthropists and the government, we've put, maybe close to $50 million into cannabis, medical cannabis research just in the last couple of years. And got research programs happening at maybe, half a dozen or a dozen universities across the country now. And what that's doing is giving a lot of Australian scientists some real hands-on experience researching cannabis. And I think, that combined with the efforts still coming out of Israel, combined with, the kinds of amazing stuff we see coming out of North America. I mean, it's a bit different because I think, especially in the States, right? Like you can basically do whatever you want as far as, scientific research goes, so long as you're happy to have it sort of under the shadow of federal prohibition, But in Australia and in Canada and other places, you can sort of do it in the light of day, which is a bit nicer.
Yeah, well, they just made a big deal about Dronabinol, which is a synthetic cannabis something or other. I don't really know what it is.
Synthetic THC, I think, right?
Yeah, synthetic THC. Yeah. Now, I don't know if I trust that or not. Have you got any information on that over there? Where are you guys with that? Because they've got this synthetic version that obviously isn't as well tested as this other thing that's been kicking around for 5,000 years. But they're telling us that it's now going to be a Schedule II drug because it will be helpful to people, and it won't be which is, to me, I don't know if it's disingenuous or not. I can't say that. I haven't researched it. But have you got any insight on that fake one?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty obscene, isn't it, that you would say Dronabinol, which is a synthetic version of Delta-9 THC, has medical benefits, but cannabis, which contains Delta-9 THC, has no medical benefits and should remain a Schedule I. I mean, not that we needed more examples of the ridiculous hypocrisy of U.S. drug policy, but, here's another one, right?
Yeah.
What's really interesting about Dronabinol and Marinol and like the other single chemical synthetic cannabis medicines is that they fit really, really neatly into the existing framework of like how people do pharmaceutical medicine. They're single chemical, single target. They're well known chemically speaking. You don't have to worry about the entourage effect or, minor cannabinoids or, these other things, right? So they're really attractive to people who are most comfortable doing traditional pharmaceutical R&D,
But I don't care how comfortable those people are. They're
exactly right. Yeah, no, I'm with you. The thing is that it's actually, according to all the evidence that we have at the moment, people don't like using synthetic cannabis products or even single cannabinoid cannabis products. You take an isolated THC to manage your nausea versus a whole plant extract, which includes THC to manage your nausea. And so far, it seems that patients really don't like the single chemical versions.
Yeah, I've heard it feels terrible.
Right. And you end up usually, according to the evidence we have at the moment, getting a much better therapeutic outcome with the whole plant products. So even though, it's easier to do, traditional pharmaceutical R&D on a single chemical Marinol or whatever, or Dronabinol, people don't want it, like it doesn't work as well.
It could be it could be the convulsions, or it might be the heart attacks, that kind of thing that might be a problem. There are
really put a crimp on your day, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it just really messes me up when I'm trying to get past something. I take a government approved item that's going to bring me down. And when this other stuff is so healthful and available. So what's your take on other countries in the world? Who's at the forefront? I mean, Portugal, they don't have any laws against it, so that's at the forefront. We also don't consult them too much when we make laws in Canada. But what about Spain and various other countries? Have you got a read on some of their ways and means regarding this turning point?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think it really depends on what you desire in cannabis regulations, because clearly, places like California have excellent patient access. Like, anyone, or soon, anyone can walk into a store and get cannabis if they want it. So, you don't have that barrier, and it's reasonably affordable, and you don't have that barrier, which is great. But, as in California, your quality regulations might not be there yet. As far as, specific product labeling, there was a report came out recently about the mislabeling of CBD products in North America. It seems pretty awful. So in, what you gain in patient access, you tend to lose out in regulated quality standardized products, if you know what I mean. So Portugal is super interesting because, their drug policy has been really effective, not just across cannabis, but all drugs in reducing, overdose deaths, reducing crime. And we've actually had quite a few Australian politicians go and visit Portugal to look at their drug policies. And they've come back to Australia, even some very conservative politicians, and said, hey, I know it's crazy, but like we've seen it and it works. Let's have a think about it.
Okay. Stop. I'm afraid that we might actually have some government people in Canada listening, and I hate them to get all IBS going or something with all of your facts coming out. It's amazing because these people, here it is from 2015 in U.S. News and World Report, that during March of 2015, many young men came to the hospital acting extremely violent and confused. They tested positive for what seemed to be cannabis, but the dosages were much higher than anticipated because these kinds of Dronabinol and synthetics are higher than that. And they had used this synthetic marijuana. There were 160 synthetic pot people, synthetic pot users, 160 sent to hospitals in April of 2015 in New York. And I mean, this is on U.S. News and World Report. Alabama public health officials shared that nearly 100 people had been hospitalized for problems linked to synthetic marijuana just between March and April, just in 2015. I don't have any update on that. But K2, Spice, Green Giant, this kind of thing, bought at certain places cheaply. But it's coming from Chinese and Pacific Rim countries and commercial chemistry labs, and I really don't understand how folks can put this into the mainstream while they demonize what's obviously natural. But
it's horrible. I mean, this is the in inverted commas synthetic marijuana. Products that cause people so much harm, like you've described. Usually they don't even have any cannabinoids in them. Like usually they are completely chemically not at all related to cannabis. But in the news, they're still called synthetic marijuana. Because that's how they're marketed to people.
And they're also marketed on the news. I've seen reports before where someone's had an issue and they just come down heavy. Oh, this is a bad time for marijuana. Exactly. Look, they're trying to legalize marijuana. This is terrible. And then they at the bottom of the story, it's like, and it was Dronabinol. Anyway, they don't tell you it was the actual bud,
itself. You know what's funny is that in New Zealand they've created a law like to avoid some of these problems, because one of the problems here is that you ban a chemical entity and then some clever guy in a lab comes up with a new chemical entity that becomes K2, and it takes 6 months before that new chemical entity gets banned, and you sort of have this lag effect. In New Zealand they put a law in place that said, okay, whoa, slow down everybody. You can't sell any new chemical entity until we've approved it. So they sort of reversed it. So that sort of put a stop
instead of chasing it afterwards.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. They were like, okay, blanket prohibition on everything that we haven't said yes to yet. If you want to sell it, you got to come through us first, and we got to test it and make sure it's not, something awful that's going to harm people. Which works well for the stuff you can buy in stores legally, but of course does nothing to affect the black market.
Yeah. So give us, just before you go, give us a few more places that you figure are leading the way. I know you've expressed excitement about Canada's political turn. I'm a little less enthusiastic than you are, but I understand we have geographical difference of awareness. But what would you say are the top 5 countries that are the most scientifically ahead of it, the most progressive, the most law-friendly to the user, partaker, medicinal or otherwise?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess Germany would probably be getting up there. I mean, it's exciting to see such a huge country, especially in Europe, take such a huge step towards cannabis legalization. I don't know how well it's working at the moment, but I wish them the very best. And I know there's lots of Canadian companies getting involved there, helping them get set up. I'm excited that New Zealand is going to probably legalize adult use cannabis within the next, say, 4 or 5 years.
What kind of cannabis?
Adult use, recreational cannabis.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So they had a new prime minister recently, and she said that within 3 years, she's going to hold a referendum on legalizing recreational cannabis. That's pretty cool. In terms of science, yeah, Israel is definitely still up there for sure. What's been interesting is seeing so many research collaborations between Australian companies and Chilean and South American groups.
Oh, South American companies. Okay, now you're talking. Chilean?
So,
yeah, that's great.
Chilean, yeah. So there's one of our big companies over here called OzCan. They have a partnership with the DEA Foundation, which is a group in Chile, and together they're actually cultivating and they're running clinical trials in Chile. Eventually that's going to bleed into the rest of South America. There's been some talk recently about Brazil, moving towards domestic cultivation. Which would be pretty huge because how many Brazilians there are.
Yeah, and the geography. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah, vast country.
And you could grow anywhere there. You wouldn't have to worry about winter. Any place down there.
It's basically made for it.
Yeah.
Or especially towards the west, near the mountains.
Sure.
But I'm really curious to find out more about Mexico's move towards medical cannabis. Because to me, I think globally speaking, the real tipping point is going to be when the US makes a move towards legalizing medical or adult use cannabis. I think that's going to be a huge point in our history, right?
Are you being attacked by a jumbo jet right now? What's going on?
Yeah. Sorry, I live in Sydney, which has an airport in the city.
All right.
Okay,
no problem. Just checking. I wasn't on a different feed all of a sudden.
No, you're all good.
Yeah.
But anyway, but as soon as we have Mexico in the south with medical, you got Canada in the north with adult use and medical. You got all of the West Coast. I think that'll finally put enough pressure on the U.S. federal government to actually do something. And when that happens, that's when the global transformation will begin, I believe.
Oh goodness! So we're sitting here waiting for the U.S. to do the right thing, and are you familiar at all with this man by the name of Jeff Sessions?
I may have come across him once or twice. Yeah.
He's Trump's. He's the guy under Trump that wants to shut all of this down somehow.
That's right. Yeah. Well, good luck to him. Yeah, try putting that genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, listen, I hope you could come back on the show sometime, Rhys. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I sure do appreciate the time difference. We entertain the notion of pre-recording this because, but I'm so glad you're able to get up at 6 in the morning.
Oh, man.
I hope you still have a good rest of your day tomorrow while I'm finishing up yesterday today.
Great. Well, look, I wouldn't do it for many people, Alan, but I'll happily do it for you. So thanks for having me on the show. It's been awesome.
Thanks, Rhys. And once again, give us the name of your organization. Give us some details on where folks can find you if they're interested in perhaps going there and participating, or at least keeping tabs on your developments that are so important to this burgeoning new industry of awareness. And
thanks a lot. Yeah, so you can check it out at cann10.com.au, or you can find me on LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to find me. Get in touch, say hi. Always happy to have a chat.
I read you loud and clear.
All right, Rhys. Well, thanks very much, and we will get in touch with you again. I'm looking forward to seeing how your program that just went by in September develops, and it brings me a lot of comfort to understand and remember that while I'm in here slinging the muck against these monsters, that not everybody's a monster. There's a lot of intelligent, well-appointed, researched folks. It also shoots down the notion that, anybody involved in cannabis has nothing to contribute to society. This is another myth of theirs that's easily blown up by speaking to a gentleman such as yourself. So thanks for presenting yourself for us, and we really appreciate it here at Green Crush.
Too kind. Thanks very much, Alan.
All right. Take care.
Cheerio.
That's Rhys Cohen, no longer with us online, but with us in spirit and memory, and we will definitely be touching down with his program again and trying to understand what's going on there with this fantastic, healthful substance. But in the meantime, before we get back to what I'd like to do next, a different little segment that we're going to do. I talked about it last week, how all of this gets into play in the first place. And when I mean that, I'm talking about how in Canada specifically, and you should listen if it's in the States, because these folks were involved in your history as well, the Bronfman gang. We're going to